Hi everyone, it's been a while since I've said a jinn story or a ghost story of some form. So I've been given a story by a friend to recite. So I will be reading out this story, and I hope you all enjoy it. It's a story from a person who went to Mauritania. So I'm going to read it now, and let me know what all you guys think. My name is Tariq Patanam. Yes, I'm going to be talking about a jinn, basic ghost stories. We all grew up with them, traded them, and transmitted them, and yet, weirdly enough, they always happen to someone's friend's distant relative back in a faraway country, or to an uncle or an aunt or a cousin of some form who for some odd reason was at the masjid, the mosque, in the middle of the night 30 years ago and saw a vacuum cleaner flying around by itself. Shout out to any jinn janitors out there keeping the mosque clean. Yep. Anyway, never did it happen right in front of my eyes here in America, so while I believe in jinn themselves and enjoyed the entertainment of campfire jinn stories, I had a very hard time believing these stories actually happened. Until, that is, the stories happened to me. I never realised how dark it could get with zero light pollution. It was like a pitch black blanket covered everything that should have been in the sight. I could barely make out the shadows of objects right in front of me. With nothing to do in this blinding darkness, I settled onto the sleeping bag strewn across the floor of the enormous foreign student's ember house tent. While at times this ember housed as many as 7 people, now no other students were here, I was alone, my sleep came in fits and bursts. Exhaustion battled the uncomfortableness of sleeping on a concrete floor. I was asleep in 1 minute, awake the next, and then asleep again. Suddenly my eyes snapped open. In the darkness I saw a man standing in the corner, leaning on the black back wall, as it was here, waiting for me. I couldn't make out his exact figure except that he was skinny, with a turban and a thin beard. I briefly considered whether I was still asleep, but no, I was definitely awake. This was no doubt my ember that I saw around me. This was no doubt the stiff concrete floor that I felt underneath me. I then fixed my eyes on this man's shadowy figure. He seemed to notice I was looking, because he acknowledged my stare with a curt nod, then immediately began walking over. I couldn't move. I was too paralysed by fear to do anything, then just lay there and watch as he came closer and closer. Then as soon as he reached the edge of my sleeping bag, he passed right around and straight out the tent. This was ridiculous. I had been warned that the Mauritanian villages don't have much of a sense of privacy and walk into your tent without asking. But this to barge into my tent the middle of the night, then stroll out without saying a word. No sir, this was too much. I grabbed the flashlight beside me, beamed it onto the man just as he was leaving, and a hot on his tail ran out to confront him. This creepster would not get away with this intrusion. Now outside, I swung around my light, searching for the direction he went off to. Left, right, straight ahead, again and again, I swung my light around, but there was no one there. No man, not even a trace. Confused and still exhausted, I went back to sleep, mumbling the Ayatul Kursi. Ayatul Kursi is a verse from the Quran. As a Muslim, I would pray or read that. The next day was a blur of studying, reading, eating and daydreaming about a sweet, cold can of Coca-Cola. Cola, that's what they sold. Not Coca-Cola, Cola. That would never come though. Before I knew it, the sun was setting once again. This time, at night, I was hesitant to tell the people around me in the other tents that what I had seen last night. I thought of confiding in someone about what I had seen that night before, but the Murantanis had already deemed me not enough of a man, and I wasn't going to ruin my image further by running away or running over and crying about a jinn. So I tried the only other strategy I could think of: stay awake the whole night. Needless to say, that strategy didn't work. Again, exhaustion from the extreme heat overcame me, and I laid down to sleep. Again, my sleep was restless. 1 minute I was awake, next minute dreaming a terrible dream, and then I awake again. Anyway, towering over me, I could make out a figure of someone I knew and disliked very, very much, but the situation didn't make any sense. This person I so disliked was supposed to be halfway across the world in America, but here they were standing over my head in a tiny remote village in Mauritania. I stirred up in shock. He glowed down at me. I grabbed my book, light, and from beside me I shined it on his face, hoping it would repel him. It didn't. Unfazed, he continued staring down in a menacing stare. I leaped up from my sleeping bag. Stumbling backwards, I turned my light on him, ready for whatever confrontation was necessary. If he pursued me to this middle of nowhere village at this ungodly hour, then I couldn't just let him go. But there was no confrontation. Whoever was standing right over me 1 second ago had vanished into the thin air. More frightened than I've ever been in my life, I looked in the direction of the Murbait's house. Murbait is the sheikh of that area. It would be so much more comfortable to stay there, sleeping close to the sheikh and his family. Surely no jinn would dare come there. But I held back. I must not seem like a scary cat, I told myself. I must not seem afraid. A month or two passed without any more visits from these apparitions. Even so, I remained a little scared and always on edge. The Murantanis continued to frighten me with various stories of a jinn. They said, for instance, one lonely night a student had been sitting at the cell phone spot to get a signal so he could browse his phone. It was about a mile away from the village, casually browsing his phone when he felt a pebble thrown at him. He ignored it at first, probably another villager playing a prank. Then, as he continued browsing his phone, he felt someone sit beside him. He glanced up from his phone. Beside him was a strange man with a horribly distorted, ugly face, grinning widely. The stranger had never before been seen around these parts, and he was never seen again. The story is probably more fiction than fact, but it's more than enough to frighten me. Every time I walked off alone to the cell phone spot around 3 a.m, I heard a wolf howling, the wind whooshing, or a stone dropping down the mountain. My heart nearly jumped out my chest sometimes. One afternoon I was flicking through a book titled Purification of the Heart, where I happened upon a chapter about fear that changed my perspective forever. Fear of anything besides God is from a weakness of faith. Referenced by Sheikh Muhammad Maulid and Muhammad al-Hassan. I thought back to the incredible fear I had of these jinns here, and realised my sense of fear did indeed stem from a weakness in faith. I had been programmed to fear way more than what was natural. Fear has become an industry. Haunted houses, roller coasters, horror movies, thrillers, etc. And like any industry, what started as something grounded in reality has been taken to an extreme in pursuit of more and more and more. We have been taught to fear everything and anything. We used to fear just the monster with a hideous face. Now we fear a little girl coming out of TV. We used to fear just the masked killer man. Now we fear the possessed killer baby. What used to be a natural reaction to the unnatural became an unnatural reaction to the irrational, and a freakish excitement and passing thrill. Another bit I read from the book says, a believer knows and fully initializes the belief that nothing can prevent what God gives and no one can give what God prevents. Sheikh Muhammad Maulid and Muhammad Al-Hassan. The ultimate believer does not fear jinn, because even if that jinn stood a hair's breadth from him and was the most hideous creature he'd ever seen, what could the jinn do without the permission of God? The ultimate believer does not fear another man, because what could that man do without the permission of God? The ultimate believer does not fear a crowd. He does not fear loneliness. He does not fear an oppressor. He does not fear poverty. He does not fear torture. And he does not fear death. He does not fear anything but the most overwhelming master of the universe. What an amazing, incredible, empowering fear that is. Last bit to my story now. So, only 2 weeks remained now till I returned to America. My back had become used to the concrete floor and my eyes to the darkness that enveloped everything for months now. I had never seen or heard anything out of the ordinary, until when, one middle of the night, I gradually awoke. From behind me, I could hear the sound of pouring water. It was almost as if someone had opened the giant carton of water I stored in my embed tent, tilted over ever so slightly, and was filling the jug slowly. Someone had come into my tent this late at night and is pouring out my water. Impossible! It must be a cow urinating just outside, as they so often did. Or surely I must be hallucinating. 10 seconds passed. The sound of pouring water continued. 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Hang on a minute. Cows don't urinate this long. It's been a minute. I was definitely wide awake, not hallucinating now. I could clearly make out the sound of pouring water came from only 2 or 3 feet behind me, precisely where I had left my giant carton of water before going to bed. At that very moment, I was almost certain that, had I turned around, I would have seen a figure standing right behind me, pouring out the water. I laughed now, but I didn't turn around. There was no need. Instead, I smiled and thought back to the chapter I had read from that book. Fear of anything besides God is from a weakness of faith. It was almost like God was testing me. I laughed, settled back into bed, and slept like a baby. The man who fears nothing but God has nothing but God to fear.